Do you believe that at this point you are feeling the ripple effects from slavery in the history of the United States and that you face systemic discrimination?
I think there have definitely been times in my life and places that I've been where I have felt the effect.
I don't believe the United States is a racist country. If you disagree, you're more than welcome to change my mind.
So it was interesting to me at the beginning you said you don't think it's a racist country today. Do you think that at some point it was a racist country?
Yes.
Again,
so that's why I'm not saying that the United States was never a racist country.
Yeah.
I think slavery was a horrible evil, of course,
Yeah.
and I think it was horrible that it took us to get to the 60s for the Civil Rights Act. I'm not at all here to argue that the United States was never a racist nation. Every single nation since really the dawn of civilization has practiced slavery in one form or another. It's still practiced across the globe. Thank God we abolished it.
Yeah, so just my question up front for you is, at what point did we stop being racist? Was when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, or when?
Yeah, I would say after the Civil Rights Act.
So the day of?
The day that everyone was given... No, I mean, systemically, yeah. Now, it doesn't mean that there weren't individual racists.
Yeah.
And particularly when I'm talking about 2020, because most of the people out there protesting are not the people who were around during the Civil Rights era. You have a lot of young Americans who have never suffered at the hands of systemic oppression.
Okay. In your sign specifically, you're talking about systemic oppression?
Yes.
Okay.
Not racist individuals. There are plenty of racist individuals, and you can find those black, white.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
we just had a gentleman right there accost my friend there who's biracial, tell him that he was white. And he said, well, that sounds kind of racist.
Right.
And then the guy got really mad. And then I said, well, I don't know, are you brown or yellow? And he got mad at me. I said, well, I'm just using your same shading rules. And he said something about checking a white box and I create all the tests. So I don't necessarily know what was going on there. But I'm not arguing that there are not individual racists. But as a country, the United States, not only do I believe that it's the best country in the world for people of any races.
I agree that overall we are the best country in the world. I agree with that. Yeah. But I think the main place where I disagree, perhaps not, we don't have systemic racism, but I think that whenever you think about racism, you have to keep in mind classism. I think that systemically there are a lot of systems that do divide classes and keep lower classes suppressed. And because of our history, because of the way that black people and many brown people were treated in the past, we are tied into lower classes. And you have to keep in mind that when you're talking about racism, oftentimes people actually mean classism, and the two are very closely intertwined. When you look at the numbers, it's how it is.
Well, let me ask you kind of to define classism and how you think that there's systemic oppression through the form of classism. And maybe we'll probably find some common ground and then some areas where we disagree.
Yeah. Just if you look at job opportunities, oftentimes people say, go ahead, get a 4-year degree. That's going to give you more job opportunities. But for people who are completely broke, oftentimes 4-year degrees are just not opportunities that they have because they can't go into that financial deficit and they don't have the time to be able to get those degrees and things like that. I think there are a number of things that, and I didn't come here prepared today to
list them off.
So I think it'll be helpful as we talk, so I can kind of.
And you would say that would apply to someone who's poor, who's white, just as much as someone who's poor is black. Like the trailer park kid from Arkansas is at just as much of a disadvantage as the poor black child from South.
Well,
South
I think
Dallas.
that the poor trailer park trash people in Arkansas.
I didn't say trash.
I did.
I'm
not mincy about words.
That's fine.
I'm concerned about the meaning behind it. I don't get triggered by the misuse of pronouns and shit.
Let me ask you this. I won't get off track. I want to go back to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Do you think most black people think the way you do?
No, absolutely not.
You think they are offended by words?
I think most people in general are offended by words.
Okay, because generally speaking,
I think I'm a rare
the
exception.
people that I've met, most average black Americans, not those in the media, don't tend to be nearly as sensitive as privileged white people about words.
I've seen it both ways.
Okay.
I don't think there's a way you can generalize it.
Okay.
I think it's a
So you're just an anomaly. Yeah.
basis. Yeah, I think we all are.
Okay.
We're all special little snowflakes.
Okay, so
Can I drink
trailer
this?
trash. I would rather you not, just because what happens is, let's say someone at Shake Shack poisoned it. Then I'm on the hook.
I work at In-N-Out, and I'll still go to.
Do you work at In-N-Out?
Yeah, I do.
Well, then I have a beef with you because I think you're
So we have
overrated,
the beef.
overhyped, over everything. So the trailer trash
Not
white kid
overpriced,
from that's true.
Yeah.
I'll give
not
you
everything.
that. That is true. I think people just like to feel like they're a part of the secret menu. So you said the white trailer trash from Arkansas. So going back to classism, do you believe that it would be the same disadvantage for someone who is poor in a lower class trailer trash white person from Arkansas as, let's say, a kid from inner city South Dallas, or they don't?
No, not quite, because of the stereotypes and the presumptions that people carry. I think that when a white person walks into the public, people oftentimes go in with a more neutral idea of what they could be. They have less assumptions and whatnot. Just like, okay, look in this room right now. I'm the only black person right
Well,
now.
you weren't.
know?
There were other black guys. I'm
Maybe
seeing
30
browns and
minutes
Asians.
ago. Okay, I'm very outnumbered. I'm out-ratioed right now, right?
Well, can I say something right there?
Yeah.
Because I will tell you this. There have been some people who've come up who've been unsavory characters,
Yeah.
and you would not be Now, I will acknowledge this. Sometimes you make assumptions when you see somebody. For example, if I see a guy with a Hell's Angels jacket, I go, ooh, let me be careful. Or if he's, got a teardrop tattoo. You would be someone here I would think, oh, that's someone who's dressed well, is articulate, has himself together.
I'm
I think
not
everyone-
dressed well right now. I'm
Well,
sorry
you're not.
about
But you're
everyone to
dressed
be me,
cleanly.
but-
You got shoes going on. You're out
I do.
here.
Barely
Not
the
every-
Ritz.
which is more than I can say for everyone here. Some of these people look like they should. They're the hobos. So I don't necessarily think that, at least in my experience, and with everyone I know who works in my crew, and we do have black people, and we do have Latinos.
Diversity
there's space-
quotas.
Yeah, it is. I don't think that people would necessarily look. I think some would. I don't think that's necessarily true.
I think it's a lot more common than you might think right off.
Could be.
Yeah, I think it's the unfortunate truth of the world that we live in, and it's derivative of the world that we came from.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know that I would agree with that for a few reasons. Like we kind of mentioned, for example, let's use the education example specifically,
Yeah.
because you said going into college. I think that actually a young black man from South Dallas has a great advantage over a young white trailer trash user from Arkansas. Eminem, Salem's Lot. We'll go that. That way it's specific and we're not generalizing anybody. It's
Sure.
a very specific person.
Hey, I'm also from Detroit.
Because, are you?
Yeah.
Oh, where are you from in Detroit?
Michigan, Detroit.
Are you actually
I
from
don't know-
Detroit?
I don't know the
People say
hospital,
Detroit, they
yeah.
mean Mount Pleasant or something.
Detroit area. I don't remember. I moved here when I was like 4, and I
Okay.
don't really.
You're from
care.
Birmingham.
No, not Birmingham. I'll remember when I hear of it.
There are far more scholarships available to black Americans, and black Americans are accepted into universities with significantly lower test scores than white Americans or Asian Americans. So I do think that there have been some attempts to right wrongs of the past, which actually haven't yielded good results. They've yielded worse results in applications and enrollments and graduations. And what's interesting is when you look at the classism, first off, we have more class mobility here in the United States than anywhere else. Certainly than
Can you
Canada.
define class mobility for me?
Meaning there are more people in the United States who end up in the top 30% of income than anywhere else in the world at some point in their life, or in the top 10%, including people go from the top 10, from the bottom 10 or the bottom 30 to the top 30 to the top. There's more class mobility here in the United States, more ability to rise out of poverty into upper middle class than anywhere else in the world. It's not even close.
Right. Just curious. I'm going to look it up afterwards. Where do you get those numbers
Absolutely.
from?
I can show them to you here
Yeah,
if you would like to.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to glance.
And it's even interesting where you take people where they might have a higher overall quality of living, like Sweden or Denmark, and you take Swedes or Danes and you bring them to the United States, and they have a higher class mobility and higher quality of living here in the United States, because I think we acknowledge that different countries have different cultures, and sometimes they're more studious, sometimes there are cultures that are more industrious. But when you transplant any culture to the United States, I shouldn't say any, but all the stats that we have available to us, the best parts of their cultures that they bring actually are accentuated, and we see more of that.
Yeah, I
So
also think it's kind of interesting. Well, when you say transplant in the United States, can you be more specific on the areas? I think.
Well, I just use like Sweden and Denmark as an example.
But
because those
where
are
in the
people-
United States when they've been transplanted to? Because
Anywhere.
anywhere in the United States,
I doubt many of them are going, to the middle of Mississippi.
Right, but I think
know.
that's part of the issue. When you look at rural areas, when you look at ghettos, where a lot of these lower income people are, where a lot of black people are, oftentimes
And
you
white
get
people.
more so black people. Oftentimes, statistically, when you look at our proportion of this society, I
No,
think
there are more white people on welfare than black people.
there are more white people in the United States.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. But I'm saying
But
as
when you
far as
look
the
at the
total
ratio-
number. Yeah, I understand when you look
I'm
at the
talking
ratio.
about population ratio
Yes.
per capita wise.
You do have more black people who are poor than white
Yeah,
people.
and
as a percentage.
oftentimes
And why do you think that is?
Mainly because of the history of the United States, the discrimination that has happened in the past, the disadvantage that we were in the past. We started so far behind in this race, so there's only so far that as a collective we're going to be now.
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
How old are you?
I'm 19.
19.
19 and a half.
So you believe that, let's say, a 19-year-old yourself.
Yeah.
You seem like a pretty articulate guy. You going to school? Or
not
you're
right now.
working in and out? I think you'll probably do okay. You seem like a pretty sharp guy.
Yeah.
You believe that at this point you are feeling the ripple effects from slavery in the history of the United States, and that you face systemic discrimination?
I think there have definitely been times in my life and places that I've been where I have felt the effects. I think overall, I grew up in a very privileged family. My parents, they make good money.
Do you have both parents?
Yeah, and that's the other
huge,
thing. That's also
far
a
bigger
huge
than
thing.
any other statistic.
Yeah.
Because when you take, that's something that I think is important, and maybe we could find common ground. When you take upper middle class white kids or black kids, they perform typically the same. When you take lower class white kids or black kids, they often perform the same. When you take any class of kids without a dad, they perform very poorly by all metrics available. As a matter of fact, if you want to avoid being in poverty, there are 3 things that you can do. It's very simple. Go to school, don't commit a crime, wait till you're married to have kids.
Right, so I want to hear your opinion on this. Why do you think that oftentimes more black children have to grow up in one household with families? I want to hear.
Can I speak freely without being accused of racism?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it goes back to the welfare reform. And it goes back to the model cities program. It goes back to a welfare state created that disincentivizes people from staying married. There's a financial incentive right now to not be married.
So if that incentive is there, why is it only happening to black families?
Because there's a higher percentage of black families who use welfare than white families.
And why is that? Because...
Well, at a certain point, though, you do have to end that cycle. There is a responsibility. Your parents chose to stay together, right? Sure. That cycle can only be broken through personal responsibility.
Yeah, but before we stray too far away from that,
sure.
Why are more black families on welfare?
But why were more black families not getting divorced? Why do they have stronger family households before the modern welfare state? In other words, blacks had a lower divorce rate. They had a lower fatherless household rate before the modern. We get it. Careful, there's a lot of connotations there.
Sure.
They had stronger family units before the modern welfare state. Now that was also sold to them from the Democratic Party. It was sold to them as something that was owed to them through reparations, right? This was a big part of the targeted black areas and encouraged them to get on welfare. And then through that point, continuing through that end, they then created financial incentives to not be married. And at a certain point, I do believe when all rights are equal, since the 1960s, as far as the right to vote, when we're talking about the right to own property, redlining has been stopped, and there are systemic advantages afforded to minorities, not afforded to white people. There does have to be, considering that we know how beneficial and how much of a privilege, there's no greater privilege than being raised in a household with a mother and a father, that some personal responsibility does need to come into account. And that someone today who chooses to walk out on their wife has nothing to do with the Emancipation Proclamation.
What do you think the solution is? What do you think the end game is?
It's very tough to propose a solution because a solution can only come from the ground up through family units, through strong family units, through moral character and teaching people to stay with their kids. Because like I said, I think if we educate young people, white and black, listen, be responsible, don't commit crimes, graduate school, wait till you're married to have kids.
Yeah.
And that will change, that will generationally change. In other words, statistically, I think it's a 97% chance that you are above at least middle class if you do those things. It's not really rocket science. And by the way, that doesn't even necessarily mean that you need a higher education degree.
Yeah.
And no one talks about it.
Right.
And unfortunately, unlike our conversation here, which I think has been pretty fruitful, you know, often if white people say that, they're accused of being a racist.
Yeah, but before we stray too far away from that,
But will we agree on that that's something that's been sort of tossed by the wayside, not been given the importance that it needs for all families staying together and raising someone in a nuclear family?
Yeah. Overall, yeah.
And that sports cars mean small penises.
Yeah.
If you drive them like that.
It's okay, we don't judge.
Yeah, we don't judge. Small penises.
It's what?
Okay.
It's not the size of the boat, motion of the ocean shit.
That's not true at
all. Going back to education, I think primary and secondary education is also a very big issue. People who grow up in less fortunate areas, people who grow up in ghettos, oftentimes they don't get the best primary education. And you're saying that the way to fix the nuclear family is to further educate these people, right?
Well, no, I didn't say that. I said we need to have a nuclear family, not to fix. There is no nuclear family in the black community a lot of the time.
All right, maybe I misheard you, but a few moments ago
I said to encourage a nuclear family. That means a mother, father, and children. In other words,
you used the word education earlier, so that's
we need to educate young people. Yeah. But I don't necessarily mean that comes through school.
So where do you think it should come from?
Inform people. Yeah,
if it's not coming from school,
well, I think it needs to come from leaders from both communities. I mean, let me ask you this: how much have you learned in school versus how much have you learned from people you respect or books that you read on your own or authoritative figures?
Far more from the latter.
Me too.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a responsibility for people to step up in positions of power, authority, who can inform. That's what I'm doing.
But I also think that's a learned skill. I think we should teach people how to learn for themselves.
Okay.
And I think that we can teach that in our school systems.
Primary schools.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, and I agree. I think that schooling is important. I come from a place like I was raised in Canada.
Yeah.
Born in Detroit, raised in Canada, and they do have a much better public education system. Because you can go to pretty much any school you want as long as you're willing to drive or take a bus. It's what we call school choice here, and a lot of people say it's racist. In Canada, it's just, if you take a bus, it's fine. So what do you believe the problem is in primary education? Or because I definitely believe that our public education system, I think we're referring to public education,
Yeah.
right, is broken and needs improvement. And you think that's a big piece of the puzzle.
Definitely.
What do you believe is broken there? And how do you think we can maybe fix it?
Hard to say as someone who's not an educator, but I think that generally schools that have better funding and then have a staff that knows how to use that funding are going to be better off in the end. So we need to have better training for the faculty of the schools so that they can know how to allocate these funds properly
How do you get better training?
by creating better programs.
And that requires money.
Yeah,
Well, I would agree with you in the sense that obviously people, if you have to go to public schools, I think homeschooling is a big option now. We've seen with the COVID-19 that people can do it.
I think homeschooling is a very 50-50 with the results. There's
Sometimes we have quite a few homeschool people on the staff. And
I'm a homeschool
they're
kid
Oh,
myself,
really?
yeah.
Oh, no, your mom must have been terrible.
Not always. I love
no.
you, Mom. I love you, Mom. I'm just going to leave it at that.
No, he doesn't. He said that you place him in a
I
burlap
love
bag
you,
and beat him
Mom.
with reeds.
Didn't say that.
But the thing is, a lot of the most funded school districts in the country are underprivileged areas. So, for example, you have like Washington, D.C., you have Detroit. These are areas specifically where you're talking about, and they have higher per pupil spending than most schools on average, certainly
Yeah.
more than many.
That's why
wealthy
earlier I
white
said
schools.
I think we need to better allocate our funds. Just more money isn't always the answer.
Right.
We need to know how to spend the money.
I agree. And that's something that, so it sounds like you'd be advocating for something like school choice. Sounds like you'd be advocating for incentives for better teachers, more punishments for teachers who are bad, whose students don't
Definitely.
do well.
All things I also agree would probably work in the police force.
I agree.
Yeah.
I completely agree. That's the thing. For me, I've been saying for a long time, we need to reduce the power of teachers' unions who protect bad teachers, to encourage good teachers, and the same exact thing with the cops. Do we agree on that?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Hey, look
Absolutely.
at that.
Watch Louder with Crowder live, Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern.